Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Haklay. This is the first training in a series of trainings that we hope um, will be very interesting for the Romanian researchers and citizen scientists that are conducting projects and or are intending to conduct projects. First of all, welcome on the behalf of the Office for Open Science within Babeș-Bolyai University. Thank you all for your interest and for the large number that you have registered to this training. We are not all here, but I hope everybody will come by the end of the training. I would like to welcome and thank Professor Muki Haklay from University College London and Université Cité Paris for being here with us and for providing us this very interesting training. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you will follow the activities of the Office for Open Science, because we are planning to do more interesting training on this topic. So, Professor Haklay, please, you have the floor. Thank you. I will admit participants as they enter the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you will notice that we put in on the interface both you got the chat and the Q&A if you want to use it and to put questions. There will be plenty of time to ask questions and to explore things together. So what I thought about doing in the next hour and a half is kind of introduce you first of all to the different activities that are included in citizen science. So we have a sort of a common understanding of what kind of things are included in citizen science. Then we will dedicate time to typologies of citizen science, so different ways of describing specific types of activity. We will see that it doesn't really work to describe activity only on one aspect, but it's a good way of thinking about citizen science. And the last part will talk about why it is relevant to researchers and to scientists to actually start thinking about citizen science within their practice. So my personal background, I got into this area somewhere in the 1990s. Before my studies, before my time, there was already interest in participatory approaches because I'm coming from geography, urban planning. I was familiar with participatory learning and action or participatory rural appraisal, which mostly happen within low and medium income countries in different parts of the world. But then during the 1990s, there was more and more interest in already digital forms of participatory mapping. So the people who came with the background of participatory rural appraisal call it participatory GIS, whereas I was coming more from the urban planning, where it was called public participation GIS. During the 2000s, that area evolved into discussion of how we do it at large scale. So that leads to volunteer geographic information or crowdsourced geographic information. And also when you add to it different ability of sensing, it was also called participatory sensing. And slowly it's consolidated during the 2010s into the field that we now call citizen science. And I was lucky to be involved in it from those public participation GIS era, but seeing all the transition over the years. So let's start with what is citizen science. Citizen science can be defined in different ways. That's one way in which we look at it, this is more about seeing different types of it. It's not a usual typology, just a way for us to know that there are many, many terms that are being used to describe what we now call citizen science. And some of it has been going on for a very long time. So, for example, in ecology and in ornithology, the practice of bird ringing is going back to the early 20th century, and it allowed people to be volunteers and then to put in a ring around the leg of different birds, and then they can be recaptured or found dead, and then that can lead to reporting about migration and about bird health and a lot of other things. Now, this is an interesting type of volunteering because it requires a very high level of training. You just can't allow anyone to start handling birds and putting rings around them in a simple way. It's really require an understanding. So there are relatively small number of people in each country, yet there is a really extensive network that when you take everyone that's involved in it, you get to thousands of people that are doing this work. And of course, many more people who are interested in birds who can report about the rings themselves. But there are also mass participation activities. So, for example, all those observations of plants and animals and birds, as I mentioned, can happen now using smartphones and other devices, and they can be used to different direction. So, for example, in the UK, since the end of the 1970s, there is the Big Garden Bird Watch, which is more educational, and invite people to look through the window for 1 hour at the end of January, and then report on all the birds that they are seeing there. And in 2021, as a result of the COVID pandemic, there were 1 million people involved in it, but in usual year, there are about 500,000. So while it's mostly about education, it does produce data that is used to understand trajectories and general patterns of bird health in the UK. There are also examples in other areas of the require environmental observation, such as meteorology. So, for example, in Austria, although there are many volunteers that report weather and climate, they identify a subgroup of people that they can really trust and that report quite a lot. And those people can act also as an early warning network to report on local issues and to report on it in a reliable and trustworthy way. There are also activities that in a traditional area where volunteers participated in research, such as, for example, the area of archaeology, where today in areas where the professional archaeologists can't work, we can now reach out and ask volunteers to fill in the place, as the Citizen project in the UK demonstrated. So all those are areas where citizen science have been around for a very long time, and changes in technology, changes in ability has made it much for people to participate in. There is, though, areas that say rely on technology. So the term citizen cyberscience was created in CERN in 2009. And that includes things like volunteer computing, when you use the computing power either of your laptop or of your phone, and when you are not using the device, you allow someone else to use the computational power of it in order to solve scientific problems. And there are good examples of that through the Dream Lab that Vodafone created and supported people to run it on their phone. There is also something called volunteer thinking, when it's not just that you give the resource to the scientist, but you also ask people to engage cognitively. So one of the early projects from the 2007-8 was Galaxy Zoo, where volunteers were asked to start helping astronomers to classify galaxies, and that even led to discoveries. So Hanne von Erkel, a school teacher from the Netherlands, actually started getting interested in the area, in the astronomy, as a result of following Brian May from the band Queen. And as a result of it, she even discovered a new object in space, the green thing that you can see on the image. And she discovered it while doing classification, and then coming across this object and asking what it is, and working with the scientists to find the detail about it. There are also really interesting examples that came out during the COVID pandemic. So, for example, the Zoe app was used in the UK and the US, and allow people to report about their symptoms as they experience them. And it proved to be faster than the reporting that was used by other bodies, because of the time that it takes those bodies to collect the information, to verify it, and to send it over to the public health authority. And what is also interesting is that because it was done in citizen science approach, it allowed the discovery of new symptoms. So it was the Zoe COVID study that demonstrated that people are losing taste and smell as a result of getting infected with COVID. Another example of it is when you need a very large group of people to help you in cognitive tasks. So, for example, a systematic literature review can be very demanding in the field of biomedicine when there are thousands and thousands of studies in a specific area. And the Cochrane crowd is doing a process where people are exposed to the abstract, sometimes to the paper, and then they can go over it and they can help scientists to analyze the information. And therefore, the speed in which high quality systematic review can be produced can be much faster. So you see that all those examples are relying on online interaction between a very large group of people and scientists who have a task to accomplish. Another type of activity is participatory, it's passive sensing, when you ask people to install a sensor somewhere in their space and then to contribute to a global network. So sensor.community allow people to create their own DIY air sensing devices and then to connect it to the internet and therefore share the result of what they measure with other people who can use it for different purposes. Another interesting example that came out of the We Count project is Telram, a project where you put a small device that look through your window and do traffic counting. So it counts how many cars, how many pedestrian, how many bicycles have passed in the street. And what's good about it is that it protects privacy, because it will share with the database only the numbers. It won't share the original images and other information. So that demonstrates how people can use a resource that they have, the window, and then put these sensors, which use a camera, and what they need is to provide it the electricity and provide it the connectivity, and that reduce the cost of setting up such a sensing system very, very much, and enable a much larger scale and much more granular approach to information. So all those things that we've just seen are the citizen cyber science, and they are based on the internet and based on ability of computers. The final type that we see is community science, and while the other two types that we've seen are usually set by scientists, so they have a task, they want people to measure air quality, or they want to understand traffic patterns. This, in community science, we're starting to give much more power to community members. So that can include, for example, in the area of participatory mapping, noise mapping. So this is an example of how it was done 15 years ago when it was done with a sensor and then putting it putting it on a paper map and marking the level of noise that they recorded. And a few years later, it was already possible to do the same thing using a smartphone, where the smartphone recorded the level of noise and people could share more information. But then there are other activities that people can do. For example, sharing the smell that they sense when they go around the area. So, for example, bad smells or good smells in different way in the odor collect up. And the importance of the participatory sensing element in it is because the decision what to measure, where to measure, and how to, and then using the act of measurement is done by members of community according to their goals. So, for example, the noise mapping was used by community who live around an airport to say what they think about the level of noise and influence planning applications. There is also a whole area of do-it-yourself science. For example, in biology, people are being able to analyze DNA in local labs in different places. For example, from Slovenia, or example from Paris, where people can explore different aspects that interest them. They can even do different types of experiment, develop different instrument, and there are interesting stories about people creating either artistics or practical project. And this DIY science, for example, help Japanese families to explore if the food that they are buying is contaminated with radioactivity after the tsunami disaster about a decade ago. Also, another part of this do-it-yourself science is what you might call personal science, and sometimes it is called N equal 1. Those are studies that done by people who want to quantify themselves. So Sarah Rigar is a Parkinson patient who since the 1980s was focusing on monitoring her condition through meticulous recording of her personal condition and the progression of the disease. And because, as she pointing out, she got 1 hour a year with a neurologist, but 8,765 hours to work on their own, she decided that she will monitor her situation and even created apps for that, created all kind of activities, and done a lot of experimentation to allow herself to monitor very accurately her condition and to have discussion, for example, with the doctor about the efficacy of different drugs and how to manage the condition much better. And as a result of it, she is in a much better situation compared to other patients. And there are other types of citizen science that is important to mention, but weren't included in this typology that I just showed you. And those are including things like, for example, citizen social science. So there is a whole area in social science that include now communities, and that creates all sorts of complexities in terms of the ethics or in terms of the practice, because a lot of social science assume that the researcher is standing away from the community and work and looking and observing what's happening in the community. In this case, for example, you take community members on the topic that you're trying to research. This is the picture is from an example of understanding the needs and experiences of caregivers, and then training them to a high level of ability in research. So what is research? How do you report? How do you keep the ethical practice of it? And then they carry out research, and at the end of it, they can get even a certificate for the work. And the research a lot of time is contributing to specific issues that the local authority or another commissioning body would like to see. At the other end of the spectrum, there is work that I was involved in of creating a data collection app for people who don't read and write, and working with hunter-gatherers who use a non-literate practice in order for them to collect the data that they are interested in. So you see that the whole interface is based on pictograms, so they can see what they collect and they can control it. And what is important is that after being involved in different processes, some of the communities actually started designing their own project and saying that they want to collect where there are elephants, where there are fish, all kind of other resources, and they do that in order to work, say, with logging companies and ensure what data will be shared, what area will be cut and what not. And those processes also include agreement with the community about what will be shared and what will be kept secret from other parties. So in the past 20-something minutes, we've seen the different examples of citizen science. We've seen wide varieties across discipline, and that's quite an important thing. You've seen examples that are going all the way from social science and even humanities, if we'll think about archaeology, all the way to astronomy and biology and other things. In fact, there isn't now a discipline that doesn't have the ability to integrate citizen science in some form. Second thing, we've seen a lot of technology used or not used. So you can run things that are based on paper form and are shared on different paper maps, but all the way to things that are not just based on smartphone, but even require you to build your own sensors or even run a biology lab in a community center. And the last bit that will influence also what we'll talk next is about the leadership. So you notice that in most projects, the leadership is by scientists. Even in the participatory sensing, the actual leadership of who is collecting all the sensing information is coming from the scientists or from other parties like the local authority who want to find information about caregivers. However, we have examples of community-led projects when communities themselves who decided they want to collect the data, and also, as I said, N equal 1 examples. So this is kind of to start with the understanding of the range of citizen science. And I will stop a little bit here in case that someone have a question. You can do it by either asking the question in the Q&A, or you can type it in the chat, or you can just open your microphone and ask it. Any form is acceptable.
Fine, we don't have any questions in the Q&A, but we definitely encourage people to be interactive and ask questions along the way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any questions so far? Or
Can I
everything is
have a
clear?
question?
Yeah.
Christian, okay, I'm Christian József from University of Bucharest, and I have only a small question related with how will be considered the upscaling of this citizen science initiative, because many of these initiatives are local, and many times, yeah, it's quite difficult to extend the geographical area or in general and also the complexity. And what is your experience about this component related with upscaling or copying the experience in other and adapting in different other places? So thank you.
Yeah, so that's a really good question and issue with it. In some of the activities that I show you, they are actually targeted at solving a specific problem. They have both a limitation in terms of time and in terms of the space that they are being covered. And indeed, especially on the spectrum of the community led science, community science side, they usually tend to be at the size of a neighborhood or something similar to that, or a village. But on the other end of the spectrum, when I showed you the online project, the Galaxy Zoo include 2 million participants. Project like OpenStreetMap that I mentioned in the volunteer geographical information that I was studying include now over 3 million people that are involved in it. So project can be at a very large scale. They are just reducing the level of engagement. So it's not that people are participating in all the design stages. If you do that, usually it goes into the smaller scale, but large projects that require a very specific and clear data collection can be scaled up. Now, the small project and the participatory mapping require more attention, and they can be replicated through this model of the citizen scientists. So if the community get involved in it and other communities are starting to share knowledge, they can start passing the knowledge and enabling other people to share it. In some cases, it was possible to offer an infrastructure that will encourage all those local activities to put the information on the same website, and therefore you start getting scaling over time, although there are different varieties in each place and in each practice about what they've been collecting. Any other questions? Okay. So I'll move to the next bit of our introduction to try and give some order. So you've seen a lot of things in different ways coming in across the example. Now we'll try to give some order by introducing very few typologies that exist in the area. In fact, there have been a lot of potential typologies about citizen science. Here's a list of 13 of them that we identified already 4 years ago, and there are probably more that they are doing different things. So when people come to the field of citizen science and participatory research, because it's so wide and exists in different disciplines, they are asking aspects of what the activity is about, or they ask what the participation is doing, or they trying to understand the educational perspectives. Each type of look will lead to a different typology, And in this paper that is mentioned there on the screen, you can find a link to all these typologies, and they can be reviewed, and you can identify one that is suitable for your needs. But the very first one that came about appeared around 2010 by Andrea Wiggins. Now it's Andrea Grover, if you're trying to look for her, and Kevin Croston. It was part of Andrea's research towards her PhD. And she's kind of coming from the area of information systems and try to suggest what way we can understand citizen science activity. She tried to make them each unique, but in fact, projects never fit into only one category, but it's still a very useful way of thinking about different projects. So one way she was looking mostly at environmental and biology-based projects. So one of the way to look at it is to look, is the project is action-oriented? So what it is, it's projects that are aimed at addressing a civic agenda, as the example that I share with you about people measuring noise in order to deal with the noise from a local airport, or people recording the smell of different industrial facilities in order to change what is happening on those facilities. Conservations are about stewardship of natural resource management, and they are mainly appearing in ecology. You can think about projects that are around bird watching that are there in order to encourage people to protect the birds, like the bird ringing that we've seen. Investigation projects are about doing scientific research that require to discover something. A lot of time it's from the physical environment. So you want people to collect samples, such as soil samples, or as we said, pictures of species or other things in order to explore a specific scientific problem. In contrast, virtual projects are what we called the citizen cyber science type. So they are ICT mediated, and there is usually no physical element at all. So that will be things like, for example, the Galaxy Zoo that we've seen, or the Cochrane crowd that we've seen. And finally, there are educational projects, which are projects that are mainly about outreach. So if we think about the example of the Big Garden Birdwatch, what happened within it is that it's mostly about engaging young people and making them care about birds. And the data that is being provided is a bonus, and it's useful, and because of the scale of the observation, when 500,000 people observe, you get so many observations that the quantity become quality. But in general, the main aim of the project is to lead to educational benefit. So that's one way of trying to split the different projects, and the names are coming from clusters that appeared in Andrea data. A more structured one appeared originally by Rick Bonney and his colleagues during a workshop in 2008-9, and then developed further by Jennifer Shirk and her colleagues in 2012. And I usually call it the 5C classification. It's the most common classification of citizen science, and you'll hear a lot of people using especially the three terms at the center of it within the literature and when they talk about citizen science. So what are the kind of things that they describe? They are describing 5 modes of collaboration between scientists and the public. One of them can be contractual, that a community, like the example that we gave about the airport and the noise, are having a problem, and therefore they are recruiting an acoustic engineer and ask them to put in a analysis, putting a listening station, collect the data, and then share it with them at the end of the process. So that's a contractual because it's inherently a consultancy. Contributory projects are generally designed by scientists, and members of the data are contributing data, or as we've seen in Galaxy Zoo, contribute analysis. Collaborative projects are usually designed by scientists, and members of the public contribute data, but also refine the project design and analyze data. The co-created project are projects that members of the public are involved from an earlier stage and even setting up the research question. And finally, collegial projects are one where non-credentialed individuals, so people who are not scientists, are carrying out the research on their own. Sometimes they ask for support from scientists and sometimes not. We can look at it through this diagram, which is based on work of Karen Cooper and others. So if you look at the rightmost bit of the diagram, you will see that, leftmost, you see the traditional scientists, where everything is done by the scientists, from the question to study design, to data collection, to analysis and interpretation, all the way through it. The area can be big or can be small. If you're talking about activity in environmental management, the result will be expected to be carried out by managers, and the research priority and education priority mean what is the purpose of the research. So if it is for publishing a scientific paper, then the research priority is high. But if it is about educating and engaging the public, then the education priority is high. And as you can see, in standard scientific project, usually the purpose of it is to focus on mostly on the research aspect and not on the educational aspect. In scientific consulting, although members of the public, as you can see here, are setting up the research question, what happens is that the whole research is carried out by scientists, at which point they are either reporting to the public and they expect them to act on it and to do what they need. It is usually a narrow because it will be a local problem. And while the research priority is medium, because the scientists usually won't publish anything from it, also the education aspect of it is low, because a lot of time in contractual project, people want to see the results. They're not necessarily starting to engage with the scientific aspect. In contributory project, it's noticeable that the role of the public is only at the data collection, as I said, view the analysis also, but notice that it can have a high level of educational aspects of it. In collaborative project, you can see that there is starting to be more complex loops. And the reason for it is that beyond the data collection, what happened is that the member of the public are also involved in refining the research question. There will be sometimes when they will say, hey, we need to collect the data differently, and so on. There aren't huge examples of collaborative, mostly because they are not reported as such. But when you are engaging the public, even in contributory project, a lot of time you can move towards the more collaborative mode. Finally, there is the co-created project that are being created all the way with the involvement of the public, and you see that it requires more engagement in different ways. A lot of time they are at small scale because of the high intensity engagement, and there is both learning by all sides. And the last example is the collegial project, where you see that the scientists are being brought in only when they are needed, which is mostly in the refining the methodology or in the analysis of the result. The last typology that we'll look before doing something that I noticed some of the people here are coming from geography, and I'll show an extra thing, is a model, it's a mode of citizen science that I suggested in 2013, and they are quite comparable to the model of share. And what I suggested is that on the most basic level, we have crowdsourcing, where participants are acting mostly as sensors or doing something that they install an element and then leave it on its own. So think about the traffic counter of Telegram, and what we have there is a model of crowdsourcing. We are having many more people involved in the activity, but it's being done at a large scale. The second mode is distributed intelligence, where we don't just ask people to give their computer resource or to give connectivity for the sensors that they put in their home, but we ask them also to do interpretation, or we ask them to analyze information. Data collection in biology a lot of time is involved in it, and that will be within this mode. The next mode is participatory science, where while the scientists are the one who are setting up the question, it will be the public who are involved more in refining the problem definition and refining the data collection and approving the protocol and so on. And finally, a mode of citizen science that I call the extreme citizen science is basically the extremities of citizen science, where the whole process is done by the participants, and they might ask scientists to get involved in it. And that's very similar to the one. And the final differentiation that I'll point out is between two areas that seem very close, the volunteer geographic information or crowdsourced geographical information and the area of citizen science. And what we can find is that there will be cases of what we would call volunteer geographical information that are not suitable, that are not suitable for to be called citizen science, such as restaurant reviews and other types of information. But they will have local location information, there will be user generated, and the data, when it's an opinion or experience, is not necessarily scientific. Whereas in citizen science, data is usually factual, and therefore in between, we are getting the area of geographic citizen science. Okay, so to summarize this part, we have seen those four classification, or three and a bit classification. We've seen the Wiggins and Crosstone, we've seen the Shirk et al., the contractual, contributory, collaborative, co-created, and collegial, and we've seen mine with the 4 different levels. Now, it's very important to point that there isn't one that it's better than the other. That's really important to consider when you're looking at citizen science. Extreme is not better, it's just suitable for some situation in a different way. Although some of the literature and some people might think that co-created is better than collaborative, that's not the case. A lot of people just want to put something on the window and help scientists and feel that they are contributing to science, and that will make them very happy, and it will allow your project to scale in a very significant way. So you should be very careful in not assuming that one mode is more important than the other in all those typologies. They're all kind of coming in a similar way, and you can decide which one is the right one for you. So again, questions, impression about those typologies. Do you feel that that's helped you in understanding or in positioning those different projects that we looked at?
Thank you for sharing this information with us. I have a question. My name is Malina Petescu-Maga. I'm from Babeș-Bolyai University. And because you mentioned a lot of concepts connected with citizen science, and because during our research projects, we believe that we performed often a participatory action research. Now, for me, it's a little bit blurred, unclear. Which are the boundaries between this participatory action research and citizen science? Because both engage citizens and in the research process, and because we in our research we gave also high priority to research, to that research that we consider to be a part of participatory action research. So where these two approaches intersect, and where do they diverge from each other? Because for me, it's not very clear now.
Yeah, it's
more
a
than
very
before.
good,
Not
yeah.
very,
Yeah, and it is indeed interesting how much crossover there is between those different approaches. So citizen science a lot of time is seen as part of different types of participatory research. You can think about the element of the participatory action research where people are collecting evidence and using the scientific method or using scientific practices as useful within citizen science. There are some people who are trying to kind of give it a narrow definition, but I feel that it's important to give those elements a wide definition in order for it to be involved. So what happened is that a lot of time, those terminology like participatory action research, participatory rural appraisal, participatory GIS, different element of digital humanities were all happening in their different disciplines without any connection. Okay? And with the emergence of the term citizen science, people from across the disciplines started to talk with each other and share their experience in different forms of participatory research. Now, each person will have its own unique and set of practices that are suitable for their discipline. So there was a reason, for example, that the people who were talking about participatory GIS were doing something that they felt is different from public participation GIS. And today there are people who would use the term community science for some things, while other people would say what you're doing is citizen science. And the answer, everything is actually correct. So there is a lot of blurring, but what we have to remember is that specific terms are getting recognized within research funding and within wider system. So if you want to carry out your participatory action research and you see a call about participatory research or about citizen science, that means that you can go after this call and include it. So I didn't answer differentiation because there isn't necessarily one. It really depends on your definition and how you want to define the activity in different ways. All
Thank
part
you.
of a wider family.
Thank you very much.
Professor Haklay, we have a question in the
Yes.
Q&A. So we have a researchers who asks, since volunteer geographic information can include opinions or experiences, how can researchers ensure or assess data quality when integrating VGI into scientific analysis? What about
Yeah.
the sample size for statistically relevant results interpretations?
So that's something that happened more and more, especially in VGI. You see it about opinion and evidence. So let's take even something such as reviews of restaurants on Google Maps or Apple Maps. I won't go into one or the others. When you take the whole thing, you'll actually have a corpus of very large number of words. And we're already seeing people using machine learning and all kind of textual mining approaches to identify sentiments and to identify views in different ways, to the degree that even the providers of those systems, say in Google Maps or other maps, are creating summaries that were created with some AI tools of describing it with all the limitation that involved. So what I'm saying is that at some point, and it's really depending on your data set and what it is that you're trying to do, you can get very large data set that will allow you to analyze information in a detailed way and to achieve information and in reliable. Now, it would really depends on the specific needs of the process and the source of information. So there isn't a simple way of saying it's above a certain numbers. But another way that I've seen it happen, and it's happened more in participatory online maps, is that you take and you encourage people to share those opinion and expression, and you can do it in a way that combine both quantitative and qualitative information. So, for example, you ask them to mark a location with +1 to 5 or -1 to 5, and then you ask them to express what it is. And once you have enough people sharing this information, you can start doing the analysis that I described before. So I hope that gives some of the answer.
Regarding this, I also have a question. We also have a question in the chat, but I will read it in a minute. I also have a question, Professor Haklay. If we have, for example, the priority goal of a project is awareness raising, right? For example, noise pollution or air pollution, but the citizens are not doing or measuring anything. They are just involved in the research by surveys, in filling out surveys like perception surveys or opinion surveys. But can that be considered participatory science?
So that, like, one of the things that we need to consider is the use of the data. If the data was never intended to be used in any serious way, then it's an exercise or it's a tutorial or some practice, but it's not fall under those categories of being part of research or being science. If it is published in some form, an online map that can be used by others for the purpose of monitoring or for similar local purposes, then it becomes something that we can define as science or research. That's usually what the literature is saying. So there is a strong attention of not wasting what came from Galaxy Zoo, is not wasting people time and thinking about what's the purpose of the data and who might use it. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that it always needs to lead to a scientific paper. So if, for example, the data that was collected from the noise mapping is one that is then written to a report and submitted to the local authority in order for them to change traffic or to consider how much airplanes should be in the local airport, and that was collected in a scientific way, that's something that is relevant for people, and it's use of scientific information within management action.
Do you have time for one more question, or
Yes.
should we address it in
Yeah,
writing?
I've seen Christian's question.
Yeah, okay, that's one.
Yeah. So, yeah. And the question is it not risky direction for real science to increase the trust in general public in developing self-science? So this is an interesting aspect that actually bring out a lot of resistance to accepting citizen science, indeed. And we see that a lot of scientists are feeling that even to some degree threatened by being involved in it, or it become very complex. Now, there are systems for encouraging people to share their information. So, for example, in the area that I showed you on the N=1 of people doing self-quantification, there is a website and a system called Open Humans, where people are invited to share their data, the data that they collected about themselves and recorded, and then decide who they are sharing it and under which condition. So instead of the situation where medical researchers or other collect data and then either keep it on themselves or with open science share it under condition of anonymity, here we have the people who invested a lot of time in collecting data, allowing other people to access it under different conditions, and even coming together and finding other people with their condition. And what is interesting about this situation is that in most cases, the people who are involved on those data collection are very educated. A lot of them, what we find across citizen science project, is over participation of people with PhDs and higher degrees. And that brings reliability to the data, but also means that we're dealing with more sophisticated users. It leaves open the question about how to engage wider people in society. I'll show you that in a second. But in terms of reliability and working with other people, it's possible to engage different groups, and the self-science can actually create opportunities for people to work on larger scale projects such as the Zoe app that I showed you. So that is it's not a full answer, but it's in the direction of the answer. So now let's go to our final part of saying, why should you care about citizen science, or why the world started to care about citizen science? And this is the story of a growing investment in science with and for society over the different programs of the European Union, and as you would expect, with the growth of both Horizon Europe in terms of funding, there is an increased number of investment. And moreover, at the end of Horizon 2020 and the beginning of Horizon Europe, actually the European Union published a citizen science fact sheet and highlight that it's really important, and it gives an interesting description of it. So it says citizen science can be described as the voluntary participation of non-professional scientists in research and innovation at different stages of the process and a different level of engagement, from shaping research agenda and policies to gathering, processing, and analyzing data, and assessing the outcome of research. So notice that it even includes participation in upstream engagement, so in defining different research objectives. And what we also see is that in the actual text of Horizon Europe, there is a requirement for co-design and co-creation in the specific objective. And also, it includes the requirement for open science, including citizen and social engagement, will be operationalized through the program, including the award criteria, key impact pathway, and topic text. And what we see is that if a project is coming in and including citizen science, it may have a better chance of getting funded than a project without it. So within those recent years, we've seen the European Union actively investing in citizen science. And where does it fit citizen science within the wider picture? I want to show you a model from the Doing It Together science project. So at the bottom, you can think about everyone in society. And at this level, you have people that, are encountering science because they do get vaccine and they do go to the doctor. But apart from that, they don't engage with science in any significant way. Above them, there are people who are passive consumptions of science. So people who read the article about science when they appear in the newspaper, they might look at a program on the television or on the radio, but they won't necessarily go out of the way to look for information about it. Above that, there is the people who are working on active consumption of science, which means, for example, taking the kids to a natural history museum or to a science event or a science fair and things like that. And you're still only listening to science, but you're now going out of your home and you're doing something active to do that. Above that, we can now think about people who participate in those small one-a-year activities, such as the Big Garden Birdwatch that I mentioned. Then you can join a volunteer thinking, you can be involved in data collection, and finally, you can involve in high engagement in DIY science. And what I can tell you is that when you're trying to guess the numbers for it, we kind of go from here, there will be everyone is 100% of society. Usually in the UK, it will be about 30% that will listen to program. Then it goes into 6% to 10% that are active consumption, 1% or 2% in the opportunistic, 0.1%, and in the end, at the DIY, it's a really small group of society. And what is interesting about this model is that the European Union took it and translated it into a study called Eurobarometer 516, where the opinion of the European public on science in general were studied in a very detailed way in 2021. It includes 32,000 interviews across Europe and careful analysis of the result of it. And you can find it on the European Union website. So if we look, for example, you see here the level of the views about scientists, both for the EU in general and for Romania in particular. So on the top, you see the European average, and at the bottom, you see the view from the Romanian public that was included in the study. And you see that on one level, it is very similar to the general view in Europe, apart for the places, for example, know best what is good for the people. So really quite a good level of trust. Believe in altruism, that scientists are altruistic, but also notice that some people see them as immoral. So more interesting for our purpose is to see this model that you've seen for the involvement in science and how it translates to the Romanian case. So we see that the kind of, it starts from this passive consumption of science, where of course the red, what you see, so the people who never do that are the level of everyone. So notice that the watch documentary, people are reporting less level than the European level. Talk about science, and you need to think about it as more declarative than what actual people are doing, because that's the nature of interviews. You see lower level of visiting science and technology museum, study science a little bit higher in terms of the local interest. And what is interesting is that in personal activity, there is higher level than the average European. So in providing personal data for scientific research, attend public meeting and debate about science, and actively take part in scientific project, which is citizen science, you see that the Romanian public is reporting higher than the rest of the Europe. And that's sort of tell you that there is a potential for more engagement in citizen science involvement, including, for example, you see here at the bottom, the participation in volunteer computing and other things like that. And just for an example, here's the examples of both Germany and France, where you see higher level on the passive consumption, but when we get into the actively take part, there is a lower level than the European average. And one of the explaining factors, and an interesting one, is the distribution of higher education. So as I told you, the evidence across citizen science project is that we see that where there are in a project after project, we see participation of people with higher degrees. So a level of undergraduate, master, or PhD. And Romania, as you can see, stand out still as one of the countries with lower level of tertiary education in the EU. And as a result of it, that might explain to us some of the things that you've seen in the information from the Eurobarometer, although that requires still work. And I have an intern here at the Learning Planet Institute that looking at the information. Another way to look at it is specifically at the age group of people at 25 to 30, and you see here the example from 2020 and the different countries and the willingness of the EU to bring everyone for about 45 or so on in terms of the knowledge economy. And that's something that we're thinking about how those agenda can work if you want to integrate citizen science activity. Another things that can be useful for understanding where things are is the mutual learning exercise on citizen science. As you can see, it ran between 2021 and 2023. And Romania was part of the countries that were involved. You can go on the website and find information, for example, on scaling, the question that Christian asked me earlier. There is a whole report on the website of the mutual learning exercise about it. but what it shows to us is that the different countries and their science ministries were interested in learning about citizen science and consider how they develop funding programs that are addressing this area. And it was interesting to engage with the Romanian science funders and to hear their interest in involvement. And one of the last aspects and new aspects of a European framework for researchers is the competence framework for researchers, which came out about a year or two ago. And within it, there is now expectations that PhD students and researchers will be able to have the knowledge, at least at foundational level, about using citizen science in the research. So it's considered to be part of the research tool. And it's not just Europe that it's involved in it, it's also in the case of the UNESCO recommendation of open science, which are covering, of course, the whole world, where the engagement with the wider society is considered to be an important part. And you can see there in the open engagement that they expect to see citizen and participatory science as part of it over here. And finally, we see also examples of leading research that wouldn't be possible to do without citizen science. So ISALA is an example that it's now award-winning. It won the award for the best citizen science project in the EU, and it's about vaginal microbiome. And the point is that if you would try to do this research in a traditional scientific research, where you would recruit a company that will recruit you clinical study participants, and then they will come in and get paid and give some samples, and then you'll take it back. And all the rest of it, you probably will spend a lot of money in order to get a very small number of participants. Whereas in this case, the people behind it in Antwerp carried out the idea that they can create kits and they can create really good information about it, and then ask women to help them and to contribute with it, although it's unpleasant, although swab difficult. Then they were giving this information, and instead of having a small sample, they jumped directly into a very large data set of 6,000 women, and that allowed them to also analyze the data and reach much more robust information about what it is that is happening. And it really improved the work, and that's all thanks to Sarah Libir in Antwerp. So it shows you that nowadays we are starting to get examples of research that is jumping ahead because of citizen science. So we moved from people who needed citizen science and didn't have other resources to people who now use it and really understand it as a superpower. So I'll just finish before opening up to questions with some more resources that you can find. So there is, for example, the European Citizen Science Project, which is actually citizenscience.eu now, and you can find it. So I'll give you the correct address in the comments. There is also the Pattern Project, which provides you a lot of training in open science, and that include resources for training in citizen science and science communication. And luckily, there are lots of open access books on citizen science, which you can just Google, download, and use for whatever thing you want. So now, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer about them, or we can do a short exercise if there aren't any questions.
Is there, we have a question from Christian again in the chat.
Yes, I see. No, the funding for citizen science doesn't contradict so the whole volunteerism is actually a really interesting assumption and something that come up a lot of time, especially when you're working with marginalized or excluded groups, and sometimes even not right ethically to expect them to volunteer and contribute to the data. The volunteering came from what I've said earlier, that the people who are involved in it a lot of time are wealthy, having time and having resources to be able to participate in that. So the documents like the characteristics of citizen science that Karina shared earlier is demonstrating that in some cases you should be able to pay people. The second thing about the initiative is that citizen science is costly. It's not something that you do without it. It requires a different type of skills. So instead of if in the past you would assemble a big group of postdocs, in this case, you will still have the postdoc to do the analysis, but you don't have people carrying out the work. Instead of that, you need to have a community manager. As you can see in the case of Isala, you need someone who will design really a beautiful website. We've seen people working on the user experience. So it requires something that require the resources. Now, it also doesn't undermine the grassroots effort. Actually, what we see is that a lot of time grassroots effort might be stopped because they are lacking equipment. So they want to run an air quality study on their whole neighborhood, and they just can't raise the resource only with their crowdfunding. So instead of that, if we're now starting to see research funders opening up to new ways of allowing communities to gain access from the national funding, that a lot of time should be a small amount of money, but it enables them to buy the tools and to carry out the analysis in a scale that would not be possible otherwise. Okay, so let's spend the last 10 minutes in your turn. And this is all examples from the study that we've done as part of this contours of citizen science. And you have here an example, a story about Eric is a teacher in Uppsala. For the past 15 years, he's been running weather station that is part of the Weather Underground Personal Weather Station Network with over 250,000 participants who share their observation data, just like Eric. In return to the data sharing, the company is providing tech support, data management services, and customized free of charge access to forecast. The company used the data to produce global weather forecast as a commercial service. Would you call it citizen science? Yes, no, why?
So it depends of who is involved, who is this 2015 participants, and also how these participants are involved, are engaged in these activities. So it's not
They
clear
have
what
weather station in home.
weather station, okay.
And they plug it to the internet. put it on this weather underground network, and then that goes to the company. I can even tell you the company is owned by IBM or was owned by IBM for a period of time. And they take all this observation in order to improve their weather forecasting.
So normally, yes, could be considered a citizen science project, but of course, I understand that can be also other details that you must consider in this answer, not only the activities. But yes, could be if these participants are not paid for that. If this
No.
participant, okay.
Yeah.
So my answer is yes, in this case.
Yeah. Anyone think have an issue with this?
I have one.
Yeah.
But if the data is used for commercial purposes and not for open scientific research,
Yeah.
would we consider it as open science?
Then it's
I
not
think-
open science, indeed, but is it still citizen science?
And does the public benefits after this set of data?
Each of them benefit personally, not the public as a whole.
Then it's a hybrid case.
Yeah, you see, so there isn't right or wrong answer, and the purpose of those examples that I'm giving you is, and you'll find them at the end of my slide. I share them with Lakwira, and she can share them with you. So here's another example. Jane is a long-time supporter of the charity British Trust of Ornithology, as she cares about birds. Okay? She is an active supporter of the Garden Birdwatch program and happy to give it £17 a year. However, she doesn't have time to carry out birdwatching survey. She is reading with interest the report from the British Trust of Ornithology Garden Bird Watch program and find the information motivating to continue her support of the project. Would you call that citizen science?
No, because she gives money, but she's not producing scientific data.
Mm-hmm. And any other view or same view supporting it?
So could be a supporter of a citizen science project. So in fact, the project is a citizen science, but he is only the beneficiary of this activity. But in fact, the activity to produce these reports, I think it could be considered a citizen science project.
Yeah, but she's not doing anything. She's just reading. She's actually doing what we mentioned.
Is not any use of this data, of course, but yeah.
She's only giving
It's only
money.
for himself. Maybe it's too egoistic.
She's just giving money. Yeah. So that's usually we see that people say that this case is more not than is indeed, that it's crowdfunding. It's not citizen, it's not even crowdsourcing. Okay, so here's another one, the last one that we'll do. Actually, I'll go because we have this example. I think that one is interesting. So Jacques has joined a massive multiplayer game in which he pays subscription fee. In the game, he is traveling through galaxies, trading, mining resources, and competing with other players. He enters an area in the game where he classifies human protein, for which he gets credits that can be traded throughout the game. The project was initiated by scientists and a gaming company. The classification will eventually get published in the Human Protein Atlas. Is that citizen science?
Yes, I think it is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
A very
also.
resourceful one.
So why?
Yeah.
Try to articulate why you feel that it is or it isn't.
Because he classifies the proteins, but I don't know how he does it. I suppose he gets some kind of training, maybe.
Yeah. Yes. You get training. It's just like other online classification.
Okay, so if he gets some training and he uses that knowledge to classify some data which will be eventually published, I suppose it's in science. And he gets something in return.
Yeah. And notice that in this case, he's actually paying in order to participate in the citizen science. So he's actually volunteering his gaming time in order to contribute to citizen science, which is an interesting way. This is, by the way, a real case. It's part of the game EVE Online, and you can find it. And indeed, it's a company in Switzerland that creates citizen science within massive online universes. Okay. So I hope that you'll have a few more of those examples included, as I said, in the presentation. I hope that I confused you well enough to understand that citizen science is a wide area. It's got a lot of activity in, and it will be different according to the different discipline. It's an opportunity for researchers from different areas to come across other people from their discipline and learn about what's possible to do with participatory ways of working with the public. And I hope that it will interest you and that it will give you an opening to search more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Haklay. And just to give you a spoiler alert, our next training will be about integrating citizen science in European research proposals. And yeah, that would be in November. We will send you an invite, and I hope you will be present there. Thank you very much, and I hope you had an interesting time with us.